In Billboard magazine from October 2017, Gary Graff rates Dreamer as #1 of his favorite top 10 Supertramp songs, giving the following reason. Everything we love about Supertramp wrapped up in 3 minutes and 33 seconds of cascading song arrangement and intertwined keyboard arrangements and vocal patterns. It's a sonic thrill ride with more twists than the average roller coaster. I wanted to pick up on this phrase because Gary Graff might not even know how right he is with his estimation. Hello everyone, this is Jonas Wolf, and today we're going to dive deep into how crazy Supertramp's Dreamer actually is from a music theory point of view. The album Crime of the Century was Supertramp's first major success, among Dreamer containing long-lasting hits like Bloody Well Right or School. It helped a lot establishing the very idiosyncratic Supertramp sound of that era, which you can recognize well in the logical song or Breakfast in America. I'm a winner, I'm a sinner, do you want my autograph? Part of this idiosyncratic sound is frontman Roger Hodgson's direct and very high voice, as well as the layering of several keyboard instruments that not only serve a harmonic function, but also give an indispensable contribution to the rhythmic groove. The two Supertramp founders Roger Hodgson and Rick Davies both wrote the songs and managed to have an equal share of contributed songs in each album. Since they worked independently, the authorship for Dreamer can very clearly be traced down to Roger Hodgson. He seems to have been a self-trained boarding school boy that as soon as he inherited his father's guitar at the age of 12 started writing and performing his own songs. Unfortunately, as so often in this genre from that era, information on formal musical training is as good as non-existent. Hodgson immediately started to work as a studio musician after finishing school, providing not only guitar and vocals, but apparently also orchestration, which speaks well for some formal craft that he had to have gathered between age 12, when being equipped with 3 chords on the guitar, and age 19, when this was released. Among the music that influenced his style the most, Hodgson points out to the Beatles time and time again. Supertramp can be seen as his and Rick Davies' own Beatles incarnation, which he openly admits, as for example in this extract from a German newspaper interview which can be found on his website. Together with Rick Davies, I wanted Supertramp to be just as bold as the Beatles. With Crime of the Century, they certainly were successful enough to follow the Beatles in their tracks. To this day, Supertramp has sold more than 60 million units. Now, as always, big selling figures don't necessarily go along with high musical quality, and the message of this video isn't that the ingenuity of Dreamer alone would explain Supertramp's lasting success. But it's an interesting thing that in all the reception of this particular song, there is not even the slightest hint of the very strange shenanigans going on below the surface. To illustrate this, I'll play a short extract from the middle section, and I want you to focus on the beat. Now try and keep up the same beat. But if I play from here, all out of a sudden, the strong beats seem to have shifted their position. I listened to the song years again and again with no intention of trying to find out something crazy happening there. But as soon as it came to me that at some points during the middle section I couldn't decide for a clear and steady one, I wasn't able to unhear that ambiguity anymore. I still enjoy the song. I actually do more than ever. But since I don't see anyone covering this aspect in an analysis or a reaction, I decided that I don't want to keep this knowledge for my own any longer now. Now on the level of structure, Dreamer already is a very strange song. When you ask lyric pages for the structure, it will sometimes give you the opening part as verses and hooks, and then a bridge in the middle part. Not only that there is no chorus section, but from a total of 3.5 minutes, the bridge section takes up a continuous 1 minute and 40 seconds, only slightly less than half of the entire song, and therefore a lot longer than each single verse and hook, or whatever you want to call this. But not only from the point of proportion, this isn't a typical bridge. If you look up definitions for bridge, A characteristic parameter often mentioned is the change of texture, for example in harmony, or that it's an instrumental part in contrast to choruses and verses, which are sections usually led by the vocals. The change of texture is definitely true here in Dreamer. We will go into more detail here later, but I can hardly think of any other bridge that exposes this kind of continuous texture development, growing denser and denser all the time, with no clear cuts in between that would allow for a clear distinction between different subsections. Thus, it is the very same section that sounds like this in the beginning, and like this about a minute and 25 seconds later. With no cut but only constant development in between. Also concerning the remaining parts, it's sufficient in my experience to label the Dreamer section as a verse. Dreamer, dreamer, dreamer. But what is the far out part then? It reappears twice with the same text and has a somewhat more powerful feeling than the other sections, so you can argue it's a chorus then. On the other hand, it doesn't reappear after the long middle section, which we called the bridge before. This part goes to the Dreamer section, which arguably also is the even more recognizable tune, as would be apt for a chorus. So how to label the different sections of the song now? I'll leave that one up to you, because in this case, there's definitely anything but a clear answer in my opinion. For the sake of communication, I will refer to the different sections very plainly as the A, B and C section during the course of this video. A being the Dreamer part, Dreamer. B the far out part, and C this most interesting thing in the middle where the rhythm gets unclear at one point. The global key of Dreamer is D major. I can only guess if it is on purpose that the first letter of the title and the key signature coincide. It is definitely on purpose, however, that I spoke of global key, because D major is the key at the very beginning, and it is also perceived as a very home-like resolution when returning there with every A section. However, that doesn't keep Hodgson from doing some colorful harmonic stuff and installing C as a secondary key through vast sections of the song. Even within the chord progression of the A section, there is some colorful playing with the chords of the D major scale. The very characteristic piano riff establishes a pendulum between a D major and an A major chord, the 1 and the 5 chord of the D major scale. It is followed up by a short chord progression C major, F major, G major, before returning to the 1-5 pendulum. The C and the F chords are not part of a D major scale, so you could say they bring a new kind of color. They can easily be derived from D major's parallel minor variant D minor, whereas G major makes a very smooth transition back to the D major realm. Borrowing chords from the parallel minor variant of a major scale, or vice versa, is labeled with the term modal mixture or modal interchange. This is not the only possible explanation, since the F and the C major chords share the same 1-5 relation like previously D and A, only transposed to the relative major key F major, which is a combination that will always work well and give some colorful, enjoyable chord changes. Since G major doesn't fit into the F major scale, it signifies that the music wants to move on somewhere, and this is very noticeable when the chord progression is hooked up once when we reach this point the second time. Now comes the B part for the first time, and we immediately notice a big change of texture not only through the additional vocals and bass, but also through the A-flat major harmony. A-flat major is very far distant from our home key of D major, so how is it that this transition was so smooth? One possible explanation can be found if we look back at the C major, F major, G major progression. Until now, we regarded them in the context of D major or F major, but in retrospect, this now feels like it was building up a 4-5-1 cadence to C major. Hands in your head, oh no! I said... All you need to do now is to turn C major into C minor, and in this scale, A flat major is the standard 6th scale degree. So from this new perspective, a standard type of cadence to C major was prepared, but then resolved to the 6th scale degree of the parallel minor scale. Going to the 6th scale degree instead of the 1 is also called a deceptive cadence. So that's why we landed on an A flat major harmony so smoothly, despite originally starting from the opposite side of the circle of fifths. The chord progression of the B section is impossible to fit into one single scale again, but like before, if we take modal mixture into account, we can see that the structure is based on a C minor scale, which turns major at the very last instance. What a day, a year, a life it is. I like this happy resolution of the chord progression, because the combination of A flat major and B flat major at first listen suggests a resolution to E flat major, which G minor is a kind of weak, disappointing evasion of. That you get a happy outcome anyway, only one step further after this short disappointment, is such a small, but in my opinion, very nice touch. From here on, we return to the A part and to the key of D major. The lyrics only differ very slightly from the first rendition. Variety stems from the high backup vocals, as well as from the fact that the lines 3 and 4 from the second verse are omitted for a short instrumental interlude. The drums have a regular beat for the first time, but I perceive that especially the bass provides the groove with its very catchy walks. Remember this little segment, it will become important later. In the second rendition of the B part, I especially like that the groove is even reinforced when for the What a Day section, which is very groovy on its own already, the organ fills up all 8th note beats that haven't been occupied by the vocals before. Complementary rhythms like these always help the groove. Just saying, if you need something like this for your own toolbox. So after so much groove, there has to be a kind of drop. And this happens exactly with the beginning of the continuous C part. As said before, the C part will go through a constant development of growing density. But harmonically speaking, it basically stays on the same C major, B flat major chord pendulum the entire time, with only very casual variations at a later stage. Since we still experience the C major chord to be the resolved harmony, whereas the B flat major chord feels like a deviation and causes tension, it would be most reasonable to label this entire section to be in the scale of C mixolydian, with C being the one chord. Over the C mixolydian pendulum, slowly a dialogue between the instruments and finally different vocal layers unfold. Rhythmically speaking, it is very clear at this point where the one of each measure is. Since both the bass and the drum fills always reinforce the one. However, this is about to change fundamentally. At a certain point, Supertramp makes us lose track where the one of the beat is. This is already anticipated when the vocals start to get high like wild, pronouncing the sentence "out of this world" in a way that is very independent from the ongoing groove. Still, bass and drums continue to keep the undistorted 4/4 pattern up. 4 bars later, however, suddenly kick drum and bass only go down on beats 2 and 4. 2 and 4 have been the weak beats until now, but kick drum and bass play them so independently in stressing that you can't get around the feeling of a rhythmical shift, as if they still were playing the 1 and the 3, and therefore an additional beat had to be added at a certain point. Do you remember how I drew your attention to one segment of the super groovy bass riff in the second A part? The bass now uses the core of the exact same riff, even at the exact same position within the measure, but with a stress on beats 2 and 4 supported by the kick drum on the respective beats, suggesting this is a pickup and the strong beat is here now. All of this causes the listener to draw the feeling of the one beat to this position. And this is why only a few bars before, the feeling of the one beat and the actual one beat will coincide. While here, the feeling of the one is shifted to the second beat, and you have no chance but to accept this as your new one beat if I play directly from where the shift already happened. Meanwhile, both vocals and keyboards stick to the original 4/4 pattern. It is as if they just don't care, because, at least in my perception, both keyboards and vocals put the stress still on the original 1 and 3 of each bar. Therefore, the whole texture now consists of two different levels that push their own rhythmical downbeats through completely independent. You could consider that a more appropriate way to notate this in a score is to give the bass and drums bar lines in different positions. And I don't know how to exactly call this phenomenon with a technical term, because this kind of stuff, as far as I am aware, has never been covered on a theoretical level. Polymetre seems not to be a sufficient term, because although it refers to music where different parts have different time signatures and therefore different downbeats, usually the different layers come back to the same downbeat from time to time. For example, when you combine a 2/4 time signature with a 3/4, like in this example from Mozart's opera Don Giovanni. However, in our Supertramp example, we have exactly the same time signature that just has been shifted to different positions for different instrument groups. In the lack of a better term, I will call this phenomenon shifted meter from here on. Attentive followers of the channel will have already noticed that I already dedicated an entire video on the same thing happening in a German 80s new wave song. So Supertramp's Dreamer isn't even unique in that regard. I would strongly argue that there is more songs and pieces with shifted meter to find, especially if you search for it in non-Western European music. I feel kind of uneasy though, since I couldn't find any comparable theoretical consideration on the topic. Of course, there is plenty of material already out there collecting songs where the meter seems shifted over a certain amount of time, for example in an intro passage. All of these examples, however, refer to cases where you are tricked over a certain amount of time by a single rhythmical layer. Anyway, back to the C part in Dreamer, which after introducing shifted meter builds up texture that is more and more dense with every bar, more and more anticipating a point where everything will culminate. I would argue that even if you as a listener cannot tell that there is two different rhythmical layers working against each other, you definitely feel that there is something strange and uneven going on. You definitely notice that everything is coming back to a more stable texture with the final reappearance of the A part. What a great experience that the point where all the built-up tension from before culminates and the return of the one as downbeat in all instruments fall to the exact same spot. No matter whether you noticed the tension of different instruments playing in different meters before or you didn't, you will definitely notice that there is a big resolution happening here and everything is stable now. The hits on the crash cymbal can clearly be identified as accents on the second beat of the bar. And also harmonically speaking, we're now back to D major again, which even if you didn't actively grasp before, will sound like a more familiar color from the very beginning of the song.
Dreamer, you know you are a dreamer. Can you put your hands in your head? Oh no!
The only thing that leaves me slightly unsatisfied with this song is that Supertramp didn't come up with a more creative way to resolve this very dense and polyphonic texture than with a simple breakdown.
Oh no!
after which we hear a glockenspiel imitating parts of the main melody while fading out. So now the big question is, did Roger Hodgson and Supertramp this shifted meter thing on purpose? Or is it just an accidental outcome? Because I don't wanna be that guy, oh, Supertramp is so genius, there has to be a secret message in it. Well, of course, Supertramp are excellent musicians. But since they didn't conceive their music the way I captured it, you know, putting everything down into a score, thinking from a piano stuff and so on, chances are very high that they wouldn't necessarily agree with my very music theory based perspective. I cannot tell if the entire shifted meters section originated consciously, accidentally, or from a loose oral agreement between the band members while rehearsing. Maybe explicitly communicating that drums and bass should play with different downbeats for a while. Maybe not. With a band like Supertramp doing so many decisions on their sound consciously and very carefully, it would be strange if the shifted meter section happened completely by accident. But until the day when Roger, Rick, or any of the band members from 74 would tell me personally, I can only guess. From their musical quality, there's no doubt that they would be able to do it both consciously and unconsciously, but it's also a fact that this shifted meter thing happens only in Dreamer. I can't find something comparable in any of their other productions. So I can't give you a real answer on the question for now. However, in case you wondered before why you would feel such subtle uneasiness or excitement in this very dense development section while listening through it, I hope to have enlightened you. And even if you, like me for a very long time, never even cared about something strange happening there, maybe you now enjoy the excitement in this build-up and the final resolution even more. I hope you enjoyed this elaboration on Supertramp as much as I did. If you like what I do, make sure to give me a comment and to hit the subscribe button if you didn't already. That's it for today. Have a good time everyone and see you soon.